Hi, I'm Rachel. And if you've ever watched your own mother turn to everyone at your sister's baby shower and announce that her successful daughter is finally giving her a grandchild, unlike some people who can't even hold down a real job, then you'll understand why I just stood there, champagne glass frozen halfway to my lips, unable to speak. What made it worse? I'd paid for the entire event. Before we dive in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The catering, the decorations, the venue, all from the business my mother called a cute little hobby. I didn't say a word. Not when Jessica, my sister, looked away in embarrassment. Not when Aunt Carol awkwardly cleared her throat. I just stood there, smile plastered on my face, as my mother continued listing all the ways my sister had succeeded where I had failed. Then the doors opened, and in walked David, my business partner, carrying a bouquet of congratulatory flowers and a bottle of champagne that cost more than my mother's monthly mortgage payment. The room shifted. Eyes moved from me to him, and suddenly, my mother's voice faltered mid-sentence. I never thought I'd be the one standing in the corner of a baby shower, dressed in clothes I'd bought from my own hard-earned money, feeling like an outsider in my family. That Sunday afternoon in Denver was unseasonably warm for April. The event space I'd rented overlooked the mountains, floor-to-ceiling windows bathing the room in natural light. Everything was perfect, from the hand-calligraphed place cards to the three-tiered cake decorated with delicate sugar flowers. I'd spent weeks planning it all, determined to give Jessica the celebration she deserved. My relationship with my family had always been complicated. To my mother, Linda, success had a very specific definition: a stable job with benefits, a husband, children, preferably in that order. My sister Jessica had checked all those boxes: nursing degree at 22, married at 24, pregnant at 28, a life laid out in perfect linear progression. I'd taken a different path. After college, I turned down the corporate job offers that made my mother beam with pride at graduation. Instead, I poured my savings into an idea everyone thought was ridiculous: eco-friendly, customizable home organization systems. "People already have shelves, Rachel," my mother had said with that dismissive wave of her hand that made me feel 6 years old again. Why would they pay more for fancy ones? 3 years of near poverty followed. 3 years of working from my tiny apartment, designing prototypes at night while doing freelance graphic design during the day to pay the bills. 3 years of my mother introducing me at family gatherings as Rachel, who's still figuring things out. Like I was a teenager experimenting with hair dye, not an adult building a business. I'd stopped trying to explain my vision to her after the Christmas dinner where she'd cut me off mid-sentence to ask Jessica about her hospital's new wing. My sister at least had the decency to look uncomfortable whenever this happened. The baby shower was supposed to be different. I'd finally landed a major contract with a national home goods chain. Modern Space, my company, was no longer just staying afloat. We were growing, hiring. I'd signed the lease on a real office space the week before. David, who'd come on as my business partner 18 months ago when we'd secured our first round of proper funding, had told me I looked different that day. "You're standing taller," he'd said. I felt taller as I arranged the last of the flowers on the gift table. The shower was set to begin in 30 minutes, but I'd been there since dawn, overseeing every detail. My mother and Jessica arrived together, my mother immediately finding fault with the table arrangements. "I would have put the gift table closer to the entrance," she said, brushing invisible lint from her blazer. "And these flowers are a bit much, don't you think? Jessica doesn't like anything too showy." I bit my tongue. Jessica loved hydrangeas. I'd specifically chosen them because they were her favorite, but arguing would only set the tone for the afternoon, and this was Jessica's day. I wanted it to be perfect for her. "The place looks beautiful, Rach," Jessica said quietly when our mother moved away to inspect the buffet. She squeezed my hand. Thank you for doing this. Guests began to arrive, friends from Jessica's hospital, cousins, neighbors from the suburb where we'd grown up. I played hostess, topping up drinks, directing people to the food, collecting gifts. My mother held court near Jessica, one hand perpetually on her daughter's shoulder like she was presenting a prize thoroughbred. I overheard snippets as I moved through the room. Yes, they've already bought the house in Washington Park. 4 bedrooms. Room to grow, you know. Mark's been made department head already, youngest one in the hospital's history. They're thinking of naming the baby after my father. Isn't that lovely? I didn't mind. I was genuinely happy for Jessica. She and Mark were good people. They deserved their success, their happiness, their growing family. What stung was how my mother framed it all, as if Jessica's choices were inherently superior because they aligned with her vision of success. The moment that changed everything came just after the gift opening. Jessica had unwrapped the last present, a handcrafted wooden rocking chair from our grandmother, and everyone had oohed and awed appropriately. There was a lull in the festivities, that natural pause before people begin to gather their things and say goodbyes. My mother stood up, champagne flute in hand. I tensed. Linda Camden never passed up an opportunity for an audience. I just want to thank everyone for coming today to celebrate Jessica and this new chapter in her life, she began, her voice carrying that practiced warmth she used for public speaking. As a mother, there's nothing more fulfilling than watching your children succeed. She paused, her gaze sweeping the room before landing on me, standing by the dessert table. Jessica has always been my rock. Steady, reliable, the kind of daughter who knows what matters in life. I took a sip of champagne, letting the bubbles burst against my tongue. I knew what was coming. Her nursing career, her beautiful marriage, to Mark, and now this precious baby. She's built a life to be proud of. Another pause. Unlike some people who prefer to chase pipe dreams instead of stability. The room went quiet. A few guests shifted uncomfortably. But we all make our choices, don't we? Jessica chose to be a healer, to create a real family. And that's why we're all here today, celebrating her success. I felt eyes on me, a mixture of pity and curiosity. The champagne turned sour in my mouth. I'm just so grateful, my mother continued, that my successful daughter is finally giving me a grandchild, unlike some people who can't even hold down a real job. The silence that followed was deafening. Jessica looked mortified, her hands protectively covering her belly as if she could shield her unborn child from the tension. I stood perfectly still, smile fixed in place, as my mother's words hung in the air. That's when the doors opened. David Chen walked in like he owned the place, which, in a way, he did, since I'd used our company card to book it. 6 feet tall, impeccably dressed in a tailored gray suit that subtly announced its own expense, he carried a bouquet of rare orchids and a bottle of Dom Perignon. Sorry I'm late, he announced to the room at large, his confident voice filling the silence. Traffic from the airport was brutal. I came straight from the Chicago meeting. He strode over to Jessica, bending to kiss her cheek. Congratulations, Jessica. You're glowing. He handed her the flowers and turned to Mark. And to the father-to-be. He presented the champagne with a firm handshake. Then, as naturally as breathing, David moved to stand beside me. His shoulder brushed mine, a subtle show of solidarity. Mrs. Camden, he said, extending his hand to my mother. Pleasure to see you again. Rachel mentioned you might not have heard our news yet. My mother took his hand automatically, her expression a mixture of confusion and the instinctive deference she always showed to successful men. News? She echoed. David smiled, that confident smile that had closed deals with investors 3 times our age. The Livingston contract. It came through yesterday while Rachel was setting up this beautiful event. He gestured around the room. She wouldn't let me call you. Said today was about Jessica, not business. My mother's eyes narrowed slightly. Livingston? The department store chain? The very one. David's hand found the small of my back. They're rolling out Rachel's designs in their flagship stores next quarter. National distribution by Christmas. I watched as my mother processed this information, her face working through several expressions. That's nice, she managed. Finally. A good opportunity for your little business. David laughed, the sound genuine but with an edge that only I recognized. Little? Mrs. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Camden, Modern Space just secured a 7-figure contract. The little business your daughter built from scratch is now projecting 8-figure revenues next year. The room, which had been hushed before, now felt electric. I could see various guests recalibrating their understanding of me in real time. 7 figures? Someone whispered. That's Rachel's company? Asked another. My mother's smile had frozen in place. Well, how surprising. David wasn't finished. Not surprising at all if you know Rachel. Her vision, her perseverance. It's remarkable. He turned to me, his expression warm. I still remember when you showed me those first designs in that tiny coffee shop. I knew then I was looking at something revolutionary. The validation washed over me like warm sunshine after years of standing in the cold. Not because I needed David's words to know my worth. I'd long since learned to believe in myself despite my mother's dismissal. But having someone else speak that worth aloud, in this room, in this moment, it changed something fundamental in how I was seen. Jessica broke the silence with a genuine smile. Rach, that's amazing. Why didn't you say anything? I shrugged, finding my voice at last. Today's your day, Jess. I didn't want to distract from that. Which is exactly why I crashed the party, David added smoothly. Someone needs to brag about Rachel since she refuses to do it herself. The tension in the room dissolved into laughter, and the gathering resumed its natural flow. People began approaching me, asking questions about Modern Space, expressing admiration for what I'd built. My mother retreated to the periphery, her moment of triumph evaporated. As the party wound down, I found myself standing next to David by the windows, watching the sun begin its descent behind the mountains. You didn't have to do that, I said quietly. He raised an eyebrow. Do what? Tell the truth about our company? I absolutely did. You know what I mean. The grand entrance. The champagne that probably cost more than most people's weekly grocery budget. David laughed. The champagne was for your sister, not for show. As for the entrance, he shrugged. I have good timing. I studied him for a moment. David had come into my business life when I was on the verge of giving up. A chance meeting at a startup conference, a conversation that lasted until the venue kicked us out, and suddenly I had not just an investor, but a true believer in my vision. He'd never met my family before today, but he'd heard enough stories over late-night work sessions to understand the dynamics at play. Thank you, I said simply. He nodded, his expression serious now. Family can be the hardest audience, Rachel. Sometimes they're so committed to the version of you they've created in their minds that they can't see who you've actually become. Across the room, my mother was helping Jessica into her coat, studiously avoiding looking in my direction. The contrast between the warmth she showed my sister and the coldness she directed at me had long since ceased to surprise me, but it still had the power to hurt. You know what's ironic? I said. Growing up, she always told us that we could be anything we wanted, but what she meant was that we could choose from a list of things she wanted for us. David followed my gaze. Some people confuse love with control. As the last guest departed, I began gathering discarded gift wrap and empty plates. Jessica approached, her husband Mark hovering protectively behind her. "Let the cleaning crew handle that," she said gently, taking the plates from my hands. "You've done enough." Our mother stood by the door, car keys already in hand, clearly impatient to leave. But Jessica ignored her pointed looks. "I'm really proud of you, Rach," she said, pulling me into an awkward hug, her pregnant belly between us. "I always knew you would make it. Your stuff is amazing." I returned the hug, feeling a familiar mix of love and sadness. Jessica had never been the problem. She'd always supported me in her quiet way. But she'd also never stood up to our mother on my behalf, preferring to keep the peace. "Thanks, Jess. That means a lot." "Jessica," our mother called sharply from the doorway. "You should be resting, not standing around chatting." Jessica sighed. "Coming, Mom." She squeezed my arm once more before joining our mother. Linda Camden paused at the threshold, her hand on the doorframe. For a moment, I thought she might say something. Acknowledge what she'd heard, perhaps even apologize for her earlier comments. Instead, she merely nodded stiffly and walked out, Jessica following in her wake. As the door closed behind them, I exhaled slowly, releasing a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. "Well," said David, coming to stand beside me. "That was enlightening." I laughed despite myself. "That was actually one of our better family gatherings." His eyebrows shot up. "Seriously?" At least this time she didn't suggest I move back home to regroup while I figure out what to do with my life. I mimicked my mother's precise diction. David shook his head. "And yet you still organized this whole event for your sister, paid for everything." I began collecting abandoned champagne flutes, needing something to do with my hands. "Jessica's not like Mom. She deserves a nice celebration." "And you deserve recognition for what you've accomplished," David countered, taking the glasses from me and setting them back down. "Rachel, look at me." I did. "What your mother said today, that wasn't about you. That was about her and her limited understanding of success. You know that, right?" I nodded, but the lump in my throat made it hard to speak. Of course I knew that intellectually. But emotional knowledge is different, deeper. There's a part of every daughter that never stops seeking her mother's approval, no matter how irrational that desire might be. "Let's get out of here," David suggested. "The venue staff can finish cleaning up. I actually do have news about the Livingston rollout. They want to feature you in their fall catalog campaign." "Me? Like my picture?" He grinned. "The brilliant female founder behind the revolutionary organization system that's going to transform American homes. Their marketing team is very excited." As we walked toward the exit, I took one last look at the space. The remnants of the perfect baby shower I'd created, pastel decorations, half-empty platters of gourmet food, gifts piled on a table. "You know what?" I said suddenly. "I think I am going to leave the cleaning to the staff." David held the door for me. "That's what you're paying them for." Outside, the evening air was cool against my skin. The mountains loomed in the distance, solid and unchanging. I'd grown up in their shadow, dreaming of a life my mother couldn't understand. Now I was living it. "Where to?" David asked as we reached his car. "The office. I can show you the mock-ups Livingston sent over." I considered for a moment, then shook my head. "Let's go to the Wheelhouse instead." The Wheelhouse was a dive bar near our first office, a shared workspace. We'd rented when we outgrew my apartment. We'd celebrated our first major retail order there, splitting a bottle of cheap champagne and eating stale pretzels from the bar. "Feeling nostalgic?" David asked as he started the engine. "Feeling like I need to remember where I came from," I replied. And who was there when it mattered? As we pulled away from the event space, I didn't look back. For For the first time in my life, I didn't feel the need to. The path forward was finally clearer than the one behind me. The wheelhouse hadn't changed in the 3 years since we'd become regulars. The same neon beer signs flickered in the windows, the same sticky floors welcomed our footsteps, and the same bartender Miguel nodded in recognition as we slid onto our usual bar stools. "The prodigal entrepreneur's return," he called out, already reaching for the bottle of Jameson we preferred. "To what do we owe the honor? Thought you fancy business? Types would be at some rooftop bar downtown by now." David laughed. "We tried those places. Turns out the drinks are overpriced and the company's not nearly as good." Miguel poured our whiskeys with a flourish. "Damn right. So what are we celebrating this time?" I took a sip, letting the familiar burn center me. Making it through a family event without causing a scene. Miguel raised an eyebrow. "That bad, huh?" "Worse," David supplied. But Rachel handled it with more grace than anyone deserved. I shot him a grateful look. In truth, I hadn't handled it at all. I just stood there, taking the verbal blows like I always did. But David's version felt better, so I let it stand. "To grace under fire, then," Miguel said, pouring himself a small measure and raising it in a toast. We clinked glasses. The whiskey was warm and grounding, nothing like the expensive champagne at the shower. Here, in this dingy bar that had witnessed both our lowest moments and our first successes, I finally felt the knot in my chest begin to loosen. "I never told you this," I said to David after Miguel moved away to serve other customers. "But the day we met at that conference, I was planning to shut everything down." He paused with his glass halfway to his lips. "What?" I nodded. I'd given myself 3 years to make it work. Time was up. I had exactly $27 in my business account and maxed out credit cards. I'd already started applying for real jobs, as my mother would say. "But your pitch was so confident. You showed me those projection charts, the customer feedback data." "All real," I assured him. I believed in the product. I just didn't believe I could keep fighting alone. David was quiet for a moment. "Why didn't you tell me?" I shrugged. "Would you have invested in someone who was ready to quit?" "I invested in your vision, Rachel. In what you built." He studied me thoughtfully. "Though I'm glad I showed up. When I did, apparently." "Just like today," I said softly. The parallel wasn't lost on either of us. David Chen, arriving at precisely the moment when I was ready to concede defeat. "It wasn't the same," he said, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. "Today, you didn't need saving. You were doing fine. Standing there like a statue while my mother humiliated me in front of 30 people? That's your definition of fine?" He shook his head. "You were choosing your battles. There's dignity in that." I considered his words. Perhaps there was truth in them. I'd spent most of my life trying to prove my worth to my mother, arranging my achievements like offerings at an altar, hoping for approval that never came. Today, for the first time, I hadn't tried to defend myself, to explain why my choices were valid. I'd simply let her words wash over me, knowing they couldn't change what I'd built. "When did you get so wise?" I asked, nudging his shoulder with mine. "Around the same time you taught me about profit margins," he quipped, breaking the seriousness of the moment. We both laughed, and the conversation shifted to business matters. The Livingston rollout, the new hires we needed to make, the office space we'd need to expand into sooner than anticipated. The familiar rhythm of our partnership reasserted itself, comfortable and energizing. Hours passed. The bar filled up and emptied again. Eventually, Miguel announced last call, and we settled our tab. Outside, the night air was crisp, stars visible, despite the city lights. David offered to call a rideshare for me, but I shook my head. "I think I'll walk for a bit," I said. "Clear my head." He looked concerned. "It's late, Rachel. I'll stick to the main streets. I need some time to think." After a moment's hesitation, he nodded. Text me when you get home. Yes, Dad, I teased. Partner, he corrected, his expression serious despite his smile. That's what we are. We look out for each other. As I watched him drive away, I felt a surge of gratitude so intense it was almost painful. What would my life look like now if we hadn't met? If I'd given up on modern space, taken some corporate job to please my mother, spent my days trying to shrink myself to fit into the narrow definition of success she'd created? I began walking, my heels clicking against the pavement. Denver at night was beautiful, the downtown lights reflecting off glass skyscrapers, the distant mountains a darker shadow against the night sky. 3 years ago, I'd walked these same streets in tears after another family dinner gone wrong, my mother's dismissive comments about my little hobby echoing in my head. Now I walked with my head up, breathing deeply, feeling the difference in myself. The business was part of it, yes. Success makes it easier to believe in your choices. But the real change was deeper. I was no longer defining my worth through my mother's eyes. My phone buzzed with a text. Jessica. Thank you again for today. Everything was perfect, and I'm so excited about your company news. Can I see some of your designs sometime? I smiled and typed back, anytime. And I'll have a custom nursery organization system delivered before the baby comes. My gift. Her response was immediate. I'd love that. And Rachel? I'm sorry about Mom. You know how she is. I did know. I'd always known. But for the first time, I truly understood that her inability to see me wasn't my failure. It was hers. It's okay, I texted back. I'm okay. And the miracle was, I meant it. The morning after Jessica's baby shower, I woke up with a strange sense of calm. The sunlight filtered through my apartment blinds, casting golden stripes across my bedroom floor. For years, family gatherings had left me with an emotional hangover, a mix of resentment, hurt, and that perpetual feeling that I needed to try harder to earn my mother's approval. But today felt different. I made coffee and carried it to the small balcony overlooking downtown Denver. 3 years ago, when I signed the lease on this apartment, my mother had asked why I would waste money on rent instead of buying a sensible starter home in the suburbs like Jessica. I remembered trying to explain how living downtown kept me connected to the creative energy I needed for my business, how the proximity to the design district was practical, not just a lifestyle choice. She'd dismissed it as another example of my impulsive decision-making. Now, I sat in the morning light, watching the city come alive beneath me, and felt a quiet certainty that I was exactly where I needed to be. My phone buzzed on the table, beside me. David. Morning. Just checking you didn't walk into traffic last night while contemplating the universe. I smiled. Still alive. Meeting still on for 10? Yep. Bringing bagels. The good ones from Rosenberg's, not the sad office kitchen variety. This was our routine. David bringing breakfast to early strategy meetings, me bringing lunch to afternoon. Sessions. Small rituals that had built our partnership over 18 months of working together. I showered and dressed with particular care, choosing a structured blazer over a simple black dress. Power dressing wasn't usually my style. I preferred comfort over formality in our small office, but today felt like a day to armor up. As I was applying mascara, my phone rang. My mother's name flashed on the screen. I stared at it, my hand frozen mid-air. After yesterday, I'd expected radio silence for at least a week, our usual pattern after conflict. Her calling the next. Morning was unprecedented. My thumb hovered over the screen. Part of me wanted to let it go to voicemail, to protect the fragile peace I'd woken up with. But another part, the part that had been raised to respect authority no matter what, compelled me to answer. Hello? Rachel. My mother's voice was crisp, businesslike. I hope I'm not disturbing you. No, I was just getting ready for work. A brief pause. Yes, well, I wanted to call about yesterday. I waited, pulse quickening despite my attempt to remain calm. That man, your business partner, he was quite forward. Not an apology then. I should have known better. David was just sharing our good news, I said carefully. The sound carried volumes of skepticism. Well, it all seemed a bit exaggerated to me. 7 figures? That kind of money doesn't just appear overnight. I closed my eyes and counted to 3. It wasn't overnight, Mom. It's been 3 years of 60-hour weeks, prototype development, relationship building. Yes, she cut in. I'm sure you've been busy with your project. But Rachel, these kinds of deals fall through all the time. I just don't want you getting your hopes up too high. There it was, the subtle undermining, the seeds of doubt she couldn't help but plant. In the past, I might have launched into a detailed explanation of our business model, our growth metrics, the solidity of our contract with Livingston. I might have tried, yet again, to make her understand that modern space wasn't a hobby or a fluke. Instead, I said, "Was there something specific you needed, Mom? I have a meeting soon." The shift in tone seemed to surprise her. There was a pause before she continued. Actually, yes. Your Aunt Patricia was asking about your business. Apparently, her neighbor's daughter is looking for work in something design-related. Patricia thought perhaps you could talk to her. Translation. Now that my business appeared to have some legitimacy, my mother was hoping to capitalize on it for family social currency. We're not currently hiring for design positions, I said. But she's welcome to send her resume to our general email. We keep applications on file. Oh, another pause. I thought perhaps given your connection. We have a hiring process, Mom. It wouldn't be fair to circumvent it. I see. Her tone cooled noticeably. Well, I'll let Patricia know you're too busy for family referrals. I pressed my fingers to my temple, feeling the familiar pressure building. That's not what I said. It's what you meant, she sniffed. Anyway, I should let you go to your important meeting. I just wanted to check if you were coming to Sunday dinner this weekend. Jessica and Mark will be there, and they want to discuss nursery colors. I thought since you're apparently some kind of design expert now. The backhanded compliment hung in the air. I thought of the dozens of Sunday dinners I'd sat through, feeling invisible as Jessica and my mother discussed hospitals and wedding plans and real estate. I thought of the times I'd tried to share my own news, only to have the conversation redirected before I'd finished speaking. I can't this Sunday, I said. We're finalizing details for the Livingston launch. On a Sunday? Disapproval radiated through the phone. Well, I suppose that's the difference between a real career and whatever it is you're doing. Jessica never misses family dinner, even with her schedule at the hospital. The familiar comparison stung, but less than it once would have. I'll try to stop by another time, I offered, more out of habit than genuine intention. Fine. Her voice was tight. I'll tell Jessica you're busy. After we hung up, I sat on the edge of my bed, breathing slowly. The conversation had unfolded exactly as it always did. My mother dropping subtle criticisms disguised as concern, making comparisons that invariably found me lacking, dismissing my work despite any evidence of its value. What had changed wasn't her approach. It was my response to it. I finished getting ready and drove to our office, a renovated industrial space in Rhino, Denver's arts district. We'd moved in just 6 months ago, after outgrowing our shared workspace downtown. The brick walls and exposed ceiling had been Jessica's idea. It reflects the raw honesty of your designs, she'd said during one of the rare times we'd managed to connect without our mother present. David was already there when I arrived, arranging bagels and coffee on the conference table. He looked up as I entered. You look like you're ready to conquer Wall Street, he commented, nodding at my blazer. My mother called this morning. Understanding dawned on his face. Ah, battle armor. I dropped my bag on a chair. She managed to imply that our Livingston deal is probably going to fall through, that I'm being unrealistic, and that Jessica would never prioritize work over family. All in under 4 minutes. David whistled. Impressive efficiency. She's had years of practice. He pushed a coffee cup toward me. So what triggered the call? Damage control after yesterday? I took a sip, grateful for the jolt of caffeine. Partly. Also, now that she thinks we might be successful, she wants me to hire her friend's daughter. Convenient timing. Isn't it, though? I sat down heavily. The thing is, I'm not even angry. I'm just tired. It's the same conversation we've been having my entire adult life, just with different details. David took the seat across from me, his expression thoughtful. You know what this reminds me of? That supplier in Chicago who kept pushing back our delivery dates. I raised an eyebrow. My mother reminds you of Stan, the unreliable packaging guy? Bear with me here. He leaned forward. Remember how we kept rearranging our schedule to accommodate him, making excuses for the delays? Until finally, we found a new supplier, I finished. And not only did our production timelines improve, but the new packaging was better quality at a lower price. He shrugged. Sometimes the solution isn't to keep working with the difficult variable, it's to change the equation entirely. I considered his words. Are you suggesting I fire my mother? He laughed. I'm suggesting you might need different boundaries. The definition of insanity is doing the same thing repeatedly, but expecting different results. Before I could respond, our office manager, Kayla, poked her head in. Sorry to interrupt, but the Livingston marketing team is on the line. They want to move up the product photo shoot to next week. The rest of the day dissolved into a flurry of activity, calls with the production team, emails to our photographers, a video conference with the Livingston buyers. By the time I looked up from my computer, it was past 7, and the office had emptied except for David, still working at his desk across the open floor plan. You should go home, I called. Weren't you meeting your sister for dinner? He checked his watch and cursed softly. Forgot. She's going to kill me. He began gathering his things. What about you? Calling it a day? I glanced at my own overflowing inbox. Soon. Just need to finish a few things. He paused by my desk on his way out. Don't stay too late. The work will still be there tomorrow. After he left, the office fell into silence. I should have gone home too. I was tired, hungry, and my eyes burned from staring at the screen. But the thought of returning to my empty apartment, with its reminder of the morning's phone call, kept me rooted to my chair. Instead, I pulled up the design files for Jessica's nursery organization system. I'd promised her I'd create something special, and despite the lingering tension from the shower, I wanted to make good on that promise. Jessica had always been caught in the middle of my conflict with our mother, and I'd never blamed her for taking the path of least resistance. I was deep into the design, sketching built-in storage features that would grow with the baby's needs, when my phone buzzed with a text. It was Jessica. Still up? Can I call? I glanced at the time. Almost 10. Jessica was usually in bed by 9, especially now that she was pregnant. I'm up. Everything okay? My phone rang immediately. Hey, I answered. Is something wrong? Everything's fine, Jessica assured me quickly. I couldn't sleep. I keep thinking about yesterday. I leaned back in my chair, preparing for what would likely be another round of gentle excuses for our mother's behavior. It was Jessica's usual role: peacemaker, translator, buffer. What about yesterday? I asked cautiously. She was quiet. For a moment. What Mom said to you? It wasn't right. I almost dropped the phone. In 30 years, I couldn't remember a single instance of Jessica directly criticizing our mother. I should have said something, she continued, her voice tight. I always tell myself it's better to keep the peace, to wait for the right moment, but the right moment never comes. And then I watch her hurt you over and over, and I just stand there. Jess, it's okay. It's not okay, she interrupted with uncharacteristic firmness. I'm about to be a mother myself, and suddenly I'm seeing everything differently. What if Mom had treated me the way she treats you? What would that have done to me? And what kind of example am I setting by staying silent when she's unfair? I blinked back unexpected tears. You don't have to fight my battles, Jess. I'm okay, really. Are you? She challenged softly. Because I've watched you try so hard for so long. Organize my baby shower, support all my milestones, and never ask for the same in return. It's not right. And I've been part of the problem. The honesty between us felt new and fragile. Jessica and I had always loved each other, but our relationship had been shaped by our mother's favoritism. Jessica made to feel responsible for my feelings, me taught to see Jessica as the standard I could never quite reach. She called me this morning, I said. Invited me to Sunday dinner to discuss nursery colors. Jessica sighed. She's been talking about nothing else since the shower. Your business partner really threw her off balance. David tends to have that effect. Is he? Jessica hesitated. Are you two? I laughed. No, definitely not. David's brilliant and I trust him completely, but we're partners in the business sense only. Oh, she sounded almost disappointed. It's just the way he stood up for you yesterday. It was like watching someone finally see you the way I've always seen you. Brilliant, determined, amazing at what you do. Her words warmed something cold inside me. Thanks, Jess. That means a lot. I mean it. And I'm going to do better. Rachel, I promise. Starting with Sunday dinner, if you're not coming, I'm not coming either. Alarm shot through me. Jess, no, don't do that. It will just make things worse. Worse for who? For Mom? Maybe she needs to experience some consequences for a change. I couldn't quite believe what I was hearing. Jessica, my conflict-averse, peace-at-all-costs sister, was threatening to disrupt the sacred institution of Sunday dinner. It was unprecedented. What about Mark? I asked. He'll be caught in the middle. Mark agrees with me, she said simply. He's never understood why Mom treats you the way she does. He's just kept quiet about it because I asked him to. I didn't know how to respond. For so long, I'd accepted my role in the family, the daughter who wasn't quite right, who needed to try harder, to conform more. I'd never expected anyone else to challenge that narrative, least of all Jessica. Listen, she continued into my silence. I want my baby to grow up knowing his or her amazing Aunt Rachel, the real you, not Mom's version of you. I want them to know that success isn't just one pathway, that taking risks and following your passion is brave, not foolish. My throat tightened. I'd like that too. Then let's start changing things now. Come to dinner on Sunday. Bring your design ideas for the nursery. And if Mom starts in with her usual comments, I promise I won't just sit there this time. After we hung up. I sat in the darkened office for a long time, letting Jessica's words sink in. The prospect of Sunday dinner still filled me with dread, but the idea of facing it with an ally, with someone who finally saw the dynamic for what it was, felt like a seismic shift. I packed up my things and headed home, the streets of downtown Denver quiet at this hour. As I walked, I thought about what David had said earlier, about changing the equation instead of continuing to work with difficult variables. Maybe that didn't mean removing my mother from my life entirely. Maybe it meant changing how I engaged with her, supported by people who saw my value clearly. My apartment felt less empty when I returned to it. I kicked off my heels, made a cup of tea, and opened my laptop to continue working on Jessica's nursery designs. As my pencil moved across the tablet, sketching storage solutions that were both beautiful and functional, I felt a familiar sense of flow, the state where my creativity connected directly to my hands, bypassing doubt and second-guessing. This was what my mother had never understood. This feeling, this alignment of purpose and ability, was why I'd turned down the sensible job offers, why I'd worked nights and weekends for 3 years with little financial reward, why I'd persisted when everyone except David told me to give up. I wasn't chasing success as my mother defined it. I was building a life where I could feel this way every day. Sunday arrived with unseasonable warmth, the kind of spring day that hints at summer. I drove to my mother's house in the suburbs, windows down, trying to calm the anxiety that had been building since I'd agreed to attend dinner. In the passenger seat was a portfolio containing the nursery designs I'd finalized the night before, along with material samples and color options. My mother's house was exactly as it had always been, lawn precisely trimmed, flowers arranged in geometric patterns along the walkway, not a stray leaf in sight. The control she exerted over her environment mirrored how she tried to shape her daughters. Any deviation from her vision was swiftly corrected, any imperfection addressed before neighbors could notice. Jessica's car was already in the driveway. I parked behind it, took a deep breath, and grabbed my portfolio. Before I could reach the front door, it swung open. Jessica stood there, her pregnant belly more pronounced than it had been at the shower a week ago. "You came," she said, relief evident in her voice. "I promised I would." She hugged me awkwardly, her belly between us. Mark's watching basketball with Dad in the den, Mom's in the kitchen, micromanaging the roast. Some things never changed. Our father, Robert Camden, was a quiet man who'd learned early in his marriage that the path of least resistance was to retreat to designated male spaces and leave the emotional terrain to his wife. I couldn't remember the last time he'd intervened in a conflict between my mother and me. "How are you feeling?" I asked Jessica, nodding toward her belly. She smiled, rubbing her side. "Like I'm carrying a future soccer player. The kicks are getting stronger." We walked through the familiar hallway toward the kitchen. Family photos lined the walls: Jessica's graduation, her wedding, my parents' anniversary celebration. I noticed, not for the first time, how few images of me were displayed. There was my high school graduation, a family vacation from when I was 12, and a formal portrait from Jessica's wedding where I stood as her maid of honor. Nothing from college, nothing from my adult life. The kitchen smelled of roasting meat and rosemary, my mother's Sunday dinner signature scent. Linda Camden stood at the island, arranging a vegetable platter with scientific precision. She looked up as we entered, her eyes moving from Jessica to me. "Rachel, you made it after all." Her tone suggested mild surprise, though she'd been the one to invite me. "I was just telling Jessica I wasn't sure if your work schedule would permit family time." And we were off to the races, not even 30 seconds in the house. "I rearranged some things," I said neutrally, setting my portfolio on the counter. The nursery designs were important. My mother's gaze flickered to the portfolio, then back to me. "Yes. Well, we're just having some preliminary discussions about colors today. Nothing that required a formal presentation." Jessica stepped in before I could respond. "Actually, Mom, I specifically asked Rachel to bring her professional designs. Since organization is literally her business, it makes sense to get her input from the beginning." My mother's hands stilled on the vegetable arrangement. The slight shift in dynamics, Jessica aligning herself with me instead of diplomatically bridging between us, was immediately apparent. "Of course," my mother said after a pause. "Though, I've been reading several articles on nursery organization. The experts recommend—" "Mom," Jessica interrupted gently. "Rachel is an expert. That's the point." I shot my sister a grateful look. She gave me a small nod in return. My mother turned to the oven, checking the roast with more attention than it required. Dinner will be ready in 20 minutes. Jessica, would you set the table? Rachel, you can help with the salad. We fell into the familiar choreography of Sunday dinner preparation, moving around the kitchen in patterns established years ago. There was comfort in the routine, despite the undercurrent of tension. As I washed lettuce leaves, I caught Jessica's eye across the room. She mimed taking a deep breath. I followed her lead, feeling some of the tightness in my chest ease. My father and Mark emerged from the den as my mother transferred the roast to a serving platter. Robert Camden gave me a quick one-armed hug. There's my entrepreneurial daughter, he said with a smile that seemed genuine. Mark tells me your business is really taking off. Some big department store contract? Before I could answer, my mother interjected. Livingston's. Though Rachel was just telling me these kinds of deals fall through all the time, so we shouldn't get too excited yet. I blinked. The complete inversion of our conversation was so blatant I almost laughed. Actually, I said, looking directly at my father, the contract is finalized. Implementation begins next month, with a national rollout by the holidays. My father's eyebrows rose. That's impressive, Rach. Congratulations. Thank you. The simple acknowledgement felt unexpectedly powerful. Mark joined the conversation, his arm around Jessica's waist. Jessica showed me some of your designs online last night. Really innovative stuff. I never would have thought about vertical storage that way. My mother's lips thinned as she carried the roast to the dining room. Let's eat before everything gets cold. The meal began with the usual ritual, my father carving the roast, my mother distributing vegetables according to her mental map. Of everyone's preferences, Jessica making sure water glasses were filled. I'd resigned myself to the probability that my mother would dominate the conversation, as she always did, steering it toward topics that highlighted Jessica's conventional success while minimizing my unconventional path. But something had shifted. As we began eating, Jessica spoke up. So, Rachel, tell everyone about the Livingston campaign. You're going to be featured in their catalog, right? All eyes turned to me. In the past, I might have downplayed it, knowing any enthusiasm would be met with my mother's skepticism. But Jessica's supportive gaze gave me courage. Yes, they want to feature the female founder angle in their marketing. Apparently, there's demand for home organization systems designed by someone who actually understands how real people live and use their spaces. My father nodded approvingly. Smart marketing on their part. Authenticity sells. And your designs really are fantastic, Jessica added. I'm so excited about the nursery system you're creating for us. I showed Mom the preliminary sketches. You sent, and she was impressed, weren't you, Mom? My mother took a small sip of water. They were certainly creative. The familiar dismissal stung, but less sharply than usual. Jessica didn't let it pass. Mom, that's not what you said when I showed them to you. You said they were remarkably thoughtful and asked if Rachel could design something for your sewing room. A flush crept up my mother's neck. I simply observed that some of the concepts might work in other spaces. Which is exactly what makes Rachel's designs so brilliant, Mark chimed in. They're adaptable to different needs and spaces. That's why Livingston wanted them. Mass appeal with customizable elements. My mother's knife scraped against her plate with more force than necessary. Well, I'm sure it's all very exciting for Rachel. Though I do worry about these sudden successes, it's important to maintain perspective. What perspective would that be, Mom? Jessica asked, her tone still pleasant but with an edge that was new. My mother looked startled. Jessica rarely challenged her directly. I simply mean that business can be unpredictable. One contract doesn't guarantee long-term stability. Actually, I said, modern space has been growing steadily for 3 years. The Livingston deal isn't a sudden success, it's the result of consistent work and strategic planning. My mother's expression tightened. Yes, Well, you've always had big ideas, Rachel. I just hope this one works out better than the others. What others? I asked, genuinely confused. Your various projects over the years. The jewelry making phase, the graphic design freelancing, that blog you started. I set down my fork. Those weren't failed projects, Mom. They were stepping stones. The jewelry helped finance my first prototypes. The freelance graphic design paid my rent while I developed the business. The blog built our initial following and helped us understand what customers wanted. Mark looked interested. That's actually a really smart approach to bootstrapping a business, using each stage to fund and inform the next. My mother's mouth opened and closed. For perhaps the first time in my adult life, I'd directly challenged her narrative about my work and found support at the family table. My father cleared his throat. Your mother just wants what's best for you, Rachel. We both do. It's just that Jessica's path has been more straightforward, easier for us to understand. It was the closest thing to an acknowledgement of the disparity in their treatment that I'd ever heard from him. I appreciate that, I said carefully, but different doesn't mean less valid or less successful. Jessica reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Which is exactly what I want my child to understand. That there are many ways to build a meaningful life. The conversation shifted to safer topics after that. Hospital gossip from Jessica's work, my father's golf game, neighborhood news. My mother was unusually quiet, contributing only brief comments and directing most of her attention to her plate. After dinner, we moved to the living room to look at the nursery designs I'd brought. I spread the drawings across the coffee table, explaining the storage concepts, the adaptable features that would grow with the child, the color palette Jessica and Mark had chosen. Even my mother seemed genuinely interested, asking questions about materials and installation. It was the most normal interaction we'd had in years, focused on the work itself rather than her perception of my choices. As the evening wound down, Jessica and Mark prepared to leave first, citing Jessica's early hospital shift the next morning. As they gathered their things, Jessica pulled me aside. "Thank you for coming," she whispered, "and for not letting Mom's comments slide like we usually do." I hugged her. It felt different this time. Having you in my corner made all the difference. She looked troubled for a moment. I should have been there sooner. All those years of staying quiet. I'm sorry, Rachel. Hey. I gripped her shoulders gently. We were both doing the best we could with the dynamics we were raised in. What matters is that we're changing things now. After Jessica and Mark left, I began collecting my design materials, preparing for my own departure. My father had retreated to his study, leaving me alone with my mother in the living room. You don't need to rush off, she said, arranging throw pillows with unnecessary precision. I could make tea. The offer surprised me. Our usual pattern after any disagreement was mutual avoidance until the next obligatory family gathering. I should get going, I replied automatically. Early. Meeting tomorrow? She nodded, her movements slowing. Your designs for the nursery are very professional. Coming from Linda Camden, this was effusive praise. Thank you. She smoothed an already perfect crease in a cushion. Jessica seems to value your opinion a great deal. I waited, sensing there was more. I suppose I haven't always. Appreciated. Your unique approach to things. She looked up, meeting my eyes directly. It wasn't the path I would have chosen. It wasn't an apology, not exactly. But it was the closest acknowledgement of our conflict that she'd ever offered. I know, I said simply. We stood in silence for a moment, the weight of years of misunderstanding between us. I didn't expect our relationship to transform overnight. One dinner, one semi-acknowledgement couldn't erase decades of criticism and comparison. But it was a start. A small crack in the rigid narrative she'd constructed about who I was and what I could achieve. Perhaps, she said finally, You could look at my sewing room sometime, if you're not too busy with your business. I nodded. I could do that. As I drove home through the quiet suburban streets, I felt lighter than I had in years after a family gathering. Not because everything was resolved, it wasn't, and might never be completely, but because something fundamental had shifted in how I positioned myself within my family's dynamics. I wasn't seeking approval anymore. I was bringing my full self to the table and letting them adjust to that reality. My phone buzzed with a text as I stopped at a red light. David. Survived the family dinner? I smiled and typed back. More than survived. I think I might have actually shown up as myself for the first time. About time, he responded. The real Rachel is pretty impressive. The light turned green, and I drove on through the night, toward ER. The city lights of downtown, toward the life I'd built for myself despite every doubt and dismissal. For the first time, that life felt not just like an act of rebellion or survival, but like a genuine achievement, one that was finally being recognized, even in the place where I'd always felt most invisible. The Livingston photo shoot was scheduled for Thursday morning at a sleek studio in downtown Denver. I arrived early, carrying a garment bag with 3 outfit options that Kayla, our office manager, had helped me select. The stylist had requested founder chic, whatever that meant. I'd settled on variations of what I actually wore: structured blazers, simple dresses, minimal jewelry. The studio buzzed with activity. Lighting technicians adjusted equipment while assistants arranged my product samples against a minimalist, white backdrop. A woman with a clipboard and an earpiece approached as soon as I entered. Rachel Camden? I'm Eliza, the creative director for this shoot. She extended her hand. We're thrilled to be featuring you in Modern Space. I shook her hand, feeling a strange sense of displacement. 6 months ago, I'd been assembling prototypes in my apartment. Now I was being ushered into a makeup chair while a team of professionals prepared to photograph me as the face of a national campaign. Your products are stunning, Eliza continued, flipping through a tablet with images of my designs. So elegant, but practical. Exactly what the modern consumer wants. Thank you, I said, watching in the mirror as a makeup artist began unloading her kit. I started designing them because I couldn't find storage solutions that actually worked for real lives. Eliza nodded enthusiastically. That's exactly the angle we want to highlight. Real solutions from a founder who understands real problems. She glanced at her clipboard. We've planned shots of you working in your studio, interacting with the products, plus some portraits for the catalog introduction. As the makeup artist began her work, I closed my eyes and tried to center myself. This was the kind of moment I'd fantasized about during those long nights of doubt, when I'd questioned whether I was foolish to pursue my vision instead of a stable career. The validation felt surreal, not just the campaign itself, but the way Eliza spoke about my work with genuine appreciation for its value. My phone buzzed with a text. David, break a leg today. Remember, you've earned this. His timing was uncanny. He always seemed to sense when I needed encouragement. I typed back a quick thanks before surrendering my phone to an assistant who offered to keep it safe during the shoot. The next several hours passed in a blur of wardrobe changes, lighting adjustments, and poses. Turn slightly left. Chin down a bit. Now show us how this unit transforms. The photographer, a woman in her 50s with salt and pepper hair and intense focus, worked with precise efficiency. These are beautiful, she said during a brief break, showing me some of the shots on her camera display. You have a natural presence. I laughed. I've never done anything like this before. Could have fooled me, she replied. You look like you belong here. Those words stayed with me as we moved into the second half of the shoot. Photos of me in my actual workshop, surrounded by tools and materials, sketching designs and assembling components. This felt more comfortable, more authentic. This was where I lived most days, creating with my hands, solving problems through design. That's it, the photographer encouraged. Just work naturally. Forget I'm here. I lost myself in the familiar motions of measuring, cutting, and fitting pieces together. This was where I'd found my voice after years of feeling silenced. This was the language I spoke fluently, even when all other communication failed. By the time we wrapped, it was late. Afternoon. Eliza showed me the preliminary selects on her laptop, images of me looking confident and focused, surrounded by my creations. The woman in those photos didn't look uncertain or defensive. She looked like someone who knew her worth. "We'll send you the final selects next week," Eliza said, closing her laptop. "But these are fantastic. The Livingston team is going to be thrilled." I thanked the crew and gathered my things, still slightly dazed by the experience. As I stepped outside the studio, I checked my phone and found 3 missed calls from Jessica, followed by a text. "Call me when you're done." Good news. I called immediately, concerned despite the reassuring message. "Rach, finally!" Jessica answered on the first ring. "How was the photo shoot?" "It was surreal. But good, I think. What's going on? Are you okay?" "I'm perfect." I could hear the smile in her voice. "Actually, better than perfect. Mark and I just got back from the anatomy scan and—" She paused dramatically. "We're having a girl." "Jess, that's amazing!" I felt a rush of genuine happiness for my sister. "How are you feeling?" "Honestly, a little terrified but mostly excited. A daughter, Rachel. Can you believe it?" Her voice softened. "I've been thinking about what kind of mother I want to be, the kind of relationship I want to have with her." The unspoken comparison hung between us. Would Jessica replicate our mother's parenting style or forge a different path? "You're going to be an incredible mom," I said, meaning it completely. For all our complicated family dynamics, Jessica had always been kind, supportive, and loving. "That little girl is lucky to have you." "I hope so." She paused. "I want her to feel free to be herself, you know? Not who I think she should be." The simple statement held volumes. Jessica was acknowledging not just our childhood, but committing to something different for her daughter. "Speaking of which," she continued, "would the amazing designer aunt be willing to adjust those nursery plans for a baby girl?" I smiled, already mentally sketching modifications. "Absolutely. Though good design is gender neutral anyway." "Of course it is," Jessica laughed. "I should know better than to suggest pink just because she's a girl." "Hey, if you want pink, we'll do pink. But maybe not the princess canopy Mom is probably already ordering." We both laughed, the shared joke a small act of liberation from our mother's rigid expectations. "Actually," Jessica said, her tone shifting, "I haven't told Mom yet. You're the first person I called after we left the doctor." The admission stopped me mid-stride as I walked to my car. "Really? Not Mom?" "Really." She sighed softly. "After Sunday's dinner, I've been thinking a lot about, well, everything. How I've always prioritized Mom's feelings, her approval, how that's affected our relationship." I leaned against my car, suddenly needing the support. "Jess, you don't have to." "I do, though." Her voice was firm. "I've been complicit in how she treats you, Rachel. By staying silent, by accepting her favoritism, I've helped maintain this unhealthy dynamic. And I don't want to bring my daughter into that system." I swallowed hard, unprepared for the frank conversation. We all did what we needed to survive. "Jess, you found your way, I found mine." "But at what cost?" she asked softly. "We've barely had a real relationship as adults because Mom's always been this buffer between us. This filter everything passes through." She was right. Even our closest moments had always been colored by our respective roles in the family structure. Jessica, the golden child, me, the disappointment. We'd never fully explored who we might be to each other without those labels. "I'd like that to change," I said, emotion thickening my voice. "I'd like to really know my sister." "Me too." Jessica's voice lightened. "Starting with you being properly involved as this baby's aunt. Not just the obligatory holiday visits, but really present in her life. A different kind of female role model than she'll get from mom." "I'd love that." The idea of being a meaningful presence in my niece's life, of showing her through example that women could define success on their own terms, filled me with unexpected joy. "Good, because Mark and I want you to be her godmother." I blinked in surprise. "Are you sure?" Mom will have to accept it," Jessica interrupted firmly. "This is our decision, not hers." By the time I drove home that evening, I felt as though something fundamental had shifted between Jessica and me. The cracks in our family's dysfunctional patterns were widening, allowing new possibilities to emerge. As I pulled into my apartment, building's garage, my phone rang. David's name flashed on the screen. "Perfect timing," I answered. "I just got home." "How did the shoot go?" "Better than I expected. They made me look like I actually know what I'm doing." He laughed. "Imagine that. Almost like you're a successful business owner or something." I smiled as I gathered my bags from the passenger seat. "How was your day? Did the production timeline meeting go okay?" "That's actually why I'm calling. The materials supplier in Portland is having issues with their bamboo shipment. Might delay our timeline by 2 weeks." I groaned. "The Livingston launch is in 6 weeks. We can't push that." "I know. I've been making calls all afternoon. I think I found an alternative supplier in Vancouver who can meet our specifications and timeline, but they're more expensive." I unlocked my apartment door, dumping my bags just inside. "How much more?" "About 15%. But their sustainability certifications are actually better than Portland's, which aligns with our brand values." "Let's do it," I decided. "Quality and timeline have to come first right now. We can absorb the additional cost." "That's what I thought you'd say. I'll finalize it tomorrow." He paused. "Hey, how did Jessica's appointment go? Wasn't that today too?" The fact that he remembered my sister's anatomy scan touched me. David had never met Jessica before the baby shower, but he'd listened to countless stories about her over late-night work sessions. "It's a girl," I told him. "And guess who's going to be the godmother?" "Congratulations, Godmother Camden. Your niece is going to have the most organized nursery in Colorado." I laughed, some of the day's tension finally releasing. "That's the plan." "Speaking of plans," David said, "are you free tomorrow night? The investors from Boston are in town and want to take us to dinner. Ordinarily, I'd handle it alone, but Davis specifically asked if you'd be there." Richard Davis was the lead investor from the venture capital firm that had provided our first round of serious funding. His interest in meeting me personally was both flattering and slightly intimidating. "Of course. Where and when?" "Garden Grace at 7. Wear your power blazer." After we hung up, I kicked off my shoes and collapsed onto my couch, mentally reviewing my wardrobe. The power blazer was a running joke between us. A charcoal gray Stella McCartney I'd splurged on after we secured our first major retail order. It had been my first professional luxury purchase, a symbol of finally valuing my own work enough to invest in how I presented it to the world. My phone buzzed with another call. My mother's name appeared on the screen. I stared at it for a moment, tempted to let it go to voicemail after the emotional intensity of the day. But our Sunday dinner had established a fragile new equilibrium. I was reluctant to disrupt. "Hi, Mom," I answered, keeping my tone neutral. "Rachel, I was beginning to think you wouldn't pick up." Her voice held its usual edge of criticism. I've been in a photo shoot all day for the Livingston campaign. I deliberately emphasized the professional nature of my absence. Yes, well, I'm calling because Jessica just told us the news. A granddaughter. The mixture of joy and proprietary satisfaction in her voice was familiar. My mother collected family milestones like trophies. It's wonderful news, I agreed. We're thinking of converting the guest room into a nursery for when the baby stays over. Jessica mentioned you're designing something for their house? I closed my eyes, already anticipating where this was headed. Yes, I'm creating a custom nursery organization system for them. I'd like to hire you to do something similar for our guest room. Professionally, she added, as if otherwise I might have assumed she wanted a family freebie. I sat up straighter, genuinely surprised by the request. My mother had never acknowledged my business as something she might utilize, much less pay for. I'd be happy to design something for you, I said carefully. I could come by next week to measure the space and discuss requirements. That would be suitable. She cleared her throat. Jessica also mentioned they've asked you to be the godmother. Here it was, the real reason for her call. I braced myself for disapproval, for subtle suggestions that a more stable family member might be more appropriate. Yes, they did. I'm honored. A pause. I suppose it makes sense. You are her only sister. Another pause. It's a significant responsibility, Rachel. Being a godparent isn't just about birthdays and Christmas presents. I'm aware of that, Mom. Are you? Because your lifestyle isn't exactly conventional. Always working, traveling for business. Children need consistency, stability. The familiar criticism stung, but less sharply than it once would have. My lifestyle is building a successful company, Mom. That doesn't make me incapable of being present for my niece. I'm simply concerned that your priorities? My priority will be being the best aunt and godmother I can be, I interrupted, surprising both of us. Just as my business is my priority in my professional life. I'm capable of balancing multiple commitments. The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken tension. My mother wasn't accustomed to being contradicted so directly. Well, she said finally, her voice tight, I suppose we'll see how it unfolds. After we hung up, I sat for a long time in the gathering twilight of my apartment, thinking about the day's conversations. Jessica choosing me as her first call after learning her baby's gender. My mother reluctantly acknowledging my professional skills. David's unwavering belief in my capabilities. Slowly, painfully, the landscape of my relationships was shifting, a tectonic realignment that threatened the familiar, but promised something potentially healthier. The ground didn't feel quite solid beneath my feet yet, but for the first time, I wasn't waiting for someone else's approval to determine if I was standing in the right place. The dinner with the Boston investors the following evening went better than I could have anticipated. Richard Davis, a trim man in his 60s with sharp eyes and a surprisingly genuine laugh, seemed genuinely impressed by both our products and our vision. Most home organization startups focus purely on aesthetics, he observed as we finished our entrees. Instagram-worthy closets that look beautiful but don't actually solve functional problems. Your approach is different. David nodded. Rachel's design philosophy has always been function first, then make the function beautiful. Not the other way around. Davis turned to me. And that came from your personal experience? I set down my wine glass. Partly. I'd lived in small spaces most of my adult life, apartments where every square inch mattered. The traditional storage solutions on the market were either flimsy, mass-produced items that fell apart, or luxury custom installations most people couldn't afford. So you created the middle ground, Davis's colleague Jennifer Warren interjected. High-quality, thoughtfully designed systems at accessible price points. That was the goal, I agreed. And now with Livingston's distribution network, we can reach markets we couldn't access as a direct-to-consumer brand. Davis leaned forward, his expression intent. The Livingston deal is impressive, but I think you're still thinking too small, Rachel. I raised an eyebrow. How so? International markets, licensing opportunities, corporate partnerships for office spaces. Modern space has potential far beyond retail. The breadth of his vision both excited and intimidated me. 3 years ago, I'd been thrilled to sell 10 units in a month. Now we were discussing global expansion. We're still stabilizing our production capacity, David pointed out. The Livingston rollout will already stretch our resources. Davis nodded. Of course. I'm not suggesting immediate expansion. But our firm specializes in scaling businesses like yours, and we see tremendous potential here. We'd like to discuss increasing our investment to facilitate that growth when you're ready. David and I exchanged glances. We'd been considering a second funding round, but hadn't anticipated it happening so quickly. The opportunity was tantalizing, but would mean significant changes to our current structure and operations. We're definitely open to that conversation, I said carefully. But we'd want to ensure any expansion aligns with our core values and quality standards. Davis smiled approvingly. That's exactly the response I was hoping for. Too many founders rush into scaling without protecting what made them successful in the first place. The rest of the dinner passed pleasantly, with the conversation shifting to broader industry trends and personal backgrounds. Davis, it turned out, had grown up in a small town not far from where Jessica and I were raised. His path to venture capital had been circuitous: engineering degree, stint in the Peace Corps, MBA, tech startups, then finance. I never had a straight line, he told me as we waited for our cars at the valet stand after dinner. The conventional route never appealed to me. I smiled, thinking of my mother's narrow definition of success. I understand that completely. Your partner mentioned you faced some resistance when starting out, Davis said, his tone casual, but his gaze perceptive. Family didn't see the vision. The question caught me off guard. David must have shared more than I realized during their previous meetings. Something like that, I admitted. Traditional career paths were highly valued in my family. Entrepreneurship seemed risky and inappropriate. Davis nodded thoughtfully. My father wanted me to take over the family insurance agency. Didn't speak to me for 2 years when I joined the Peace Corps instead. He chuckled. Now he brags about me to everyone who'll listen. Funny how that works. That hasn't been my experience, I said, more candidly than I'd intended. Success hasn't really changed the narrative. Ah, he said, understanding immediately. Some people can't adjust their vision, even when reality contradicts it. Their loss. He gave me a grandfatherly pat on the shoulder as the valet brought his car around. For what it's worth, what you've built is exceptional. Not just commercially, viable, but genuinely valuable. That's rarer than you might think. His words stayed with me during the drive home, merging with the other validations I'd received recently, from the Livingston team, from Jessica, even the grudging acknowledgement from my mother. Together, they were forming a counter-narrative to the one I'd heard my entire life. When I arrived home, I kicked off my heels and settled on my couch with my laptop. Without entirely planning to, I found myself Googling Small Business Awards, Denver, Colorado. I'd always dismissed the idea of applying for such recognition, partly from modesty and partly from fear of rejection. But something had changed. I was beginning to understand that claiming my accomplishments wasn't vanity, it was accuracy. I spent the next hour researching local business recognition programs and industry awards for design innovation. By the time I finally closed my laptop, I'd bookmarked 5 opportunities with upcoming deadlines and drafted outlines for the applications. The next morning, I arrived at our office earlier than usual, energized by a sense of possibility that had been building since the investor dinner. Kayla looked up in surprise when I walked in at 7:30. "You're here early," she commented, already at her desk with her usual enormous cup of coffee. "Especially after your fancy dinner. How did it go?" "Really well. The Boston group wants to discuss increasing their investment to help us scale." Her eyes widened. "Seriously? That's huge, Rachel." I smiled, appreciating her enthusiasm. Kayla had been our first full-time hire after David joined, a recent marketing graduate with boundless energy and organizational skills that put even mine to shame. She'd become indispensable, handling everything from social media to office management with equal competence. "It could be," I agreed. "We'd need to figure out exactly what scaling looks like for us. I don't want to sacrifice quality or our company culture for growth." "Obviously," she nodded. "But still, it's validation, right? These serious investor types think what you've built is worth backing." Her framing echoed Davis's words from the previous night. Validation. Worth. Concepts that had been in short supply throughout my formative years. I set my bag down and poured myself coffee from the pot Kayla had already brewed. "I've been thinking about applying for some business, awards and design recognition. Could you help me research opportunities and deadlines?" Kayla's face lit up. "Absolutely. I've actually been keeping a file of potential awards I thought we should go for, but I wasn't sure if you'd be interested." Of course she had. Kayla's efficiency bordered on clairvoyance sometimes. "That's perfect. Let's go through them this afternoon." David arrived an hour later, looking surprisingly refreshed for someone who'd been out late at a business dinner. "Morning," he called, dropping his messenger bag on his desk. "Already plotting world domination, I see." I smiled. "Just the first stages." "Kayla's helping me research award opportunities for the company." He raised an eyebrow. "Look who's finally ready to step into the spotlight." "Not the spotlight," I corrected. "Just not hiding in the shadows anymore." He nodded, understanding. "Perfectly." About time. Speaking of recognition, I got an email from that design blog this morning. They want to feature your work in their Innovators Under 40s series. My first instinct was to downplay it, to suggest they feature both of us or the company generally rather than me specifically. But I caught myself, recognizing the familiar pattern of diminishing my accomplishments. "That sounds great," I said instead. "Send me the details and I'll follow up with them." David smiled approvingly, as if he'd witnessed my internal struggle, and was proud of my choice. The rest of the morning passed in a flurry of activity. Production meetings, calls with the Livingston team, design revisions for our next collection. I was deep in a CAD program, refining the measurements for Jessica's nursery system, when my phone rang. I almost let it go to voicemail until I saw the name on the screen. Mark, Jessica's husband. A flutter of concern made me answer immediately. "Mark, is everything okay? Is Jessica all right?" "Hey, Rachel. Everything's fine. Sorry to worry you." His voice was calm, reassuring. "Jessica's perfect. I'm actually calling about something else." I leaned back in my chair, relieved. "What's up?" "I know this might seem out of the blue, but I wanted to talk to you about the baby shower." I tensed automatically. The baby shower had been a turning point, but not one I was eager to revisit. "What about it?" "The way your mom treated you," he began. "Mark, really, it's okay. Jessica and I have talked about it. I know you have, and that's part of why I'm calling." He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "Jessica's trying to establish healthier boundaries with your mom, but it's hard for her. She spent her whole life trying to keep the peace." I understood immediately. "And you're worried about her stressing herself out during the pregnancy." "Exactly." He sounded relieved that I'd grasped his concern. "Linda's been calling daily about nursery plans, trying to take over the decision-making. She's talking about moving in for a month after the baby comes. Jessica doesn't want that, but she's struggling to say no directly. The patterns were so familiar they were almost comforting in their predictability. My mother inserting herself, assuming control, Jessica accommodating to avoid conflict. The only difference was Mark's presence as an observer and advocate. "What can I do to help?" I asked. "I was hoping you might have some advice on setting boundaries with your mom without causing a complete meltdown. You've managed to establish your independence, even if it came with conflict." I nearly laughed at the irony. Me, offering advice on healthy boundaries with Linda Camden? But Mark was right. I had managed to build a life outside my mother's approval, however painfully. "The first thing to understand is that there will be conflict," I said honestly. "Mom doesn't respond well to having her authority questioned. The key is deciding which battles are worth fighting and holding firm on those." "That's what I figured," Mark sighed. "The problem is, with the baby coming, everything feels like a battle worth fighting. This is our child, our decisions. Start with the most important boundaries, like the living arrangement after birth. Be clear and united. Don't justify or defend, just state your decision." I hesitated, then added, "And maybe I can help run interference sometimes. Give Mom another focus." "That would be amazing," Mark said, gratitude evident in his voice. "Jessica's been saying she wants you more involved anyway. Not just as the baby's aunt, but in her life generally. You two were close once, before." "Before we were assigned our roles," I finished for him. "The responsible one and the dreamer." "Exactly. Jessica misses her sister." By the time we ended the call, I'd promised to come over for dinner the following week to help Jessica organize the baby's room and discuss strategies for managing my mother's expectations about her role as grandmother. I sat at my desk for a long time afterward, staring out the window at the Denver skyline. The patterns established in childhood had shaped all of us. My mother's controlling nature, Jessica's peacekeeping, my rebellion. But patterns could be disrupted, roles could be redefined, relationships could be rebuilt. For the first time, I wasn't the only one questioning the family narrative. Jessica was pushing back in her gentle way. Mark was advocating for healthier boundaries. Even my mother seemed subtly different, still critical and controlling, but slightly more willing to acknowledge my professional accomplishments. David poked his head into my office, interrupting my thoughts. "Earth to Rachel, production team. Needs approval on the bamboo samples from Vancouver. You okay? You look 1,000,000 miles away." I refocused, smiling at his concerned expression. "Not 1,000,000. Maybe just a few decades. Thinking about family patterns." "Ah," he nodded sagely. "The eternal quagmire. Any revelations?" "Just that change is possible. Difficult, messy, and incomplete, but possible." He leaned against the doorframe. "Sounds like progress to me." Progress. The word resonated. Not perfection, not complete transformation, but movement in a better direction. After so many years of stagnation in my family dynamics, even small shifts felt monumental. "Yeah," I agreed. "I think it might be." The email from Livingston's marketing team arrived on a Tuesday morning in late April. I was in the middle of a production meeting when my phone buzzed with the notification. I glanced down, saw the subject line, "Final Approval, Modern Space Launch Campaign," and felt my heart skip. "Sorry," I said to our manufacturing team, who had been walking us through the latest prototype adjustments. "Can we take a 5-minute break?" David shot me a curious look as everyone else filed out of the conference room. "Everything okay?" The Livingston campaign materials just came through. I pulled my laptop closer, fingers hovering over the keyboard. "Final approval needed before they go to print." He immediately understood the significance. This wasn't just marketing materials. It was the culmination of 3 years of work, The public unveiling of everything I'd built while my mother told me I was wasting my time, while former classmates climbed predictable corporate ladders, while I ate ramen, noodles, and worked until 2 a.m. most nights. Want me to step out? David offered. I shook my head. Stay, please. The email contained a link to a secure server where the complete campaign assets were stored. I clicked through, and there it was, the double-page spread that would introduce Modern Space to Livingston customers nationwide. My photo dominated one page, not a fashion model pose, but me in my workshop, sleeves rolled up, completely absorbed in assembling one of my designs. The lighting captured the concentration on my face, the precision of my hands. The facing page showcased the products themselves, beautifully photographed against minimal backgrounds that emphasized their clean lines and functional elegance. But it was the headline that made my breath catch. Designed by someone who understands. Real life. Meet Rachel Camden, the founder revolutionizing how we organize our homes. Below, in smaller text. When Rachel Camden couldn't find storage solutions that worked for her small apartment, she didn't just complain, she reinvented the entire approach to home organization. The result? Modern Space. Beautifully designed, sustainably crafted systems that adapt to how you actually live. I stared at the screen, momentarily speechless. Wow, David said softly beside me. That's perfect. I nodded, unable to form words around the emotion constricting my throat. They got it. They understood exactly what had driven me to create Modern Space. Not just aesthetic appeal, not just functionality, but a solution to a real problem that affected people's daily lives. The catalog continued with page after page of my designs, each accompanied by lifestyle photos showing them in use. A family kitchen with the modular pantry system, a home office with the adjustable desk organizers, a child's room with the growth-adaptable storage wall that had been one of my earliest innovations. They want approval by end of day, I said finally, scrolling through the last few images. But I don't see anything that needs changing. They captured it exactly. David leaned back in his chair. Then let's approve it. This is happening, Rachel. In 6 weeks, your designs will be in every Livingston store across the country. The reality of it washed over me in waves. National distribution, my face and name in a major retail catalog. The business I'd built from nothing, recognized and validated on a scale I'd barely allowed myself to imagine. I typed a quick approval, email, attaching the signed release forms, and hit send before I could overthink it. As soon as I did, a curious lightness spread through my chest. Not pride exactly, but a sense of rightness, of arrival. We should celebrate, David said, reading my expression. Dinner tonight? I'll invite the team. I nodded, smiling. Absolutely, they deserve it as much as we do. David got up to invite everyone back into the conference room, but paused at the door. You know what this means, right? What? You're going to have to tell your mother you're going to be in a national catalog. I groaned, letting my head fall dramatically onto my folded arms. Can't I just let her discover it at the doctor's office waiting room like everyone else's? Mom, he laughed. Sadly, I think that approach might cause more problems than it solves. He was right, of course. Since the baby shower confrontation and the subsequent Sunday dinner, things with my mother had settled into an uneasy new pattern. She wasn't exactly supportive of my business, but she had stopped actively dismissing it. Instead, she'd adopted a wait-and-see attitude, peppered with occasional reminders that these things often don't work out long-term. The manufacturing team filed back in, and we resumed the meeting. But a part of my mind remained fixed on the catalog images, on seeing my work presented so professionally, so seriously. It wasn't just vindication, it was invitation. An invitation to step fully into the identity I'd been building piece by piece over years of doubt and determination. That evening, David organized an impromptu celebration at Carbon, a local restaurant known for its craft cocktails and inventive, small plates. Our entire team came, all 12 people who now depended on Modern Space for their livelihoods. As I looked around the table at their animated faces, I felt a swell of responsibility mixed with deep satisfaction. These weren't just employees. They were believers in the vision, contributors to something we were building together. Kayla raised her glass. To Rachel and Modern Space, about to take over the world, one beautifully organized shelf at a time. Everyone cheered, clinking glasses. I felt my cheeks flush with the unaccustomed attention. And to all of you, I added, raising my own glass. None of this happens without this team. The Livingston campaign is just the beginning of what we're going to accomplish together. The evening flowed with easy camaraderie, the conversation moving naturally between business plans and personal stories. I found myself seated next to Miguel, our newest designer hire, a recent graduate with a fresh perspective that complemented my more practical approach. "I have to tell you," he said during a lull in the table's conversation, "working at Modern Space has completely changed how I think about design. In school, they taught us to focus on aesthetics first, then figure out functionality. Your approach, starting with the problem and designing toward the solution, it's changed everything for me." His words touched me deeply. Beyond the commercial success, beyond the validation, the idea that I might be influencing a new generation of designers felt like a legacy I'd never anticipated. "Thank you, Miguel. That means a lot to me." As the evening wound down, I checked my phone and saw 3 missed calls from Jessica, followed by a text. "Call me when you can. Nothing urgent. Just want to chat about Mom." I excused myself and stepped outside, the spring evening air cool against my skin after the warmth of the restaurant. Jessica answered on the first ring. "Hey, sorry for all the calls. I just needed someone to vent to. Everything okay?" She sighed heavily. "Mom's driving me crazy with the nursery. She showed up today with paint swatches, all pink, obviously, and started talking about how they'd look in her nursery at her house." "Her nursery?" I echoed. "Exactly. She's convinced the baby will be staying with her and Dad at least 2 weekends a month." I tried to explain that a newborn needs to be with its mother, especially since I'll be breastfeeding, but she just waved me off like I was being difficult. I leaned against the brick exterior of the restaurant. "That sounds exactly like Mom. I know you're busy with the Livingston launch, but would you be willing to come over this weekend? Mark and I thought maybe if we all sat down together to discuss realistic expectations for the first few months, she might actually listen. You know how she gets when she has an audience. She tries to appear more reasonable." The request surprised me. In the past, Jessica had been the family diplomat, the one who smoothed things over when tensions arose. Now she was asking me to help establish boundaries with our mother, a significant shift in our dynamic. "Of course I'll come," I said, without hesitation. "I'll bring the nursery designs we discussed. Maybe having a concrete plan for your own space will help redirect her focus." Jessica's relief was audible. "Thank you. I knew I could count on you." After we hung up, I rejoined the celebration, but my mind kept returning to Jessica's request. For the first time in our adult lives, she was openly acknowledging the challenges of dealing with our mother's controlling nature and seeking my help in addressing it. The baby shower confrontation had shifted something fundamental between us, created an opening for a more honest, equal relationship. The next morning, I woke early, my mind already racing with the day's tasks. The Livingston approval had triggered a cascade of deadlines, production schedules to finalize, quality control processes to review, marketing materials for our own channels to align with the department store launch. I made coffee and carried my laptop to the small balcony of my apartment, determined to get a head start before heading to the office. The spring sunrise painted the Denver skyline in washes of pink and gold, the mountains a purple silhouette against the brightening sky. As I sipped my coffee, I noticed an email notification from a name I didn't recognize. Eleanor Harding, Editor-in-Chief, Design Innovation Magazine. Curious, I opened it. Dear Ms. Camden, I recently had the pleasure of previewing the upcoming Livingston catalog featuring your modern space collection. Your approach to functional aesthetics and sustainable materials impressed me greatly, and I would like to discuss the possibility of featuring your work in our annual Designers to Watch issue this September. I read the email twice, making sure I hadn't misunderstood. Design Innovation was one of the most respected publications in the industry, known for spotlighting emerging talent alongside established names. A feature there would put modern space on the radar of interior designers, architects, and high-end consumers beyond the Livingston demographic. I typed a quick, professional response accepting the invitation to discuss the opportunity, then sat back, letting the significance sink in. The momentum was building, one recognition leading to another, each opening new doors. My phone rang, startling me from my thoughts. My mother's name flashed on the screen. I checked the time, 7:15 a.m., unusually early for her to call. Mom? Is everything okay? Rachel? Her voice held a strange note I couldn't quite identify. I just wanted to let you know your father and I are planning to visit Jessica and Mark this weekend to discuss the nursery arrangements. I assume you'll be too busy with work to join us. It wasn't a question, but a statement. The familiar assumption that my business would always take precedence over family obligations. In the past, I might have accepted the exclusion, using work as a shield against potential conflict. But something had shifted. Actually, I'll be there too, I said firmly. Jessica asked me to bring the nursery designs we've been working on, together. A pause. I wasn't aware you were designing Jessica's nursery. She didn't mention it? I kept my tone light, though I knew perfectly well Jessica had told her. We've been collaborating on a custom system that will grow with the baby, very functional but still beautiful. Another longer pause. I see. Well, I suppose having professional input could be helpful. The grudging acknowledgement was new territory for us. That's the idea, I agreed. What time were you planning to be there? We thought around 1 o'clock. Your father is golfing. In the morning. 1 works for me. I'll see you there. After we hung up, I sat with my cooling coffee, reviewing the conversation. My mother's tone had been different, still controlling, still attempting to exclude me, but with an undercurrent of something else. Uncertainty, perhaps. The realization that the dynamics were changing, that her ability to shape the narrative was diminishing. I arrived at Jessica and Mark's house that Saturday at 12:30, intentionally early to have time with them before my parents arrived. Their home was a charming craftsman in one of Denver's older neighborhoods, with built-in bookshelves and original hardwood floors that had attracted Jessica immediately when they were house hunting. Mark answered the door, looking relieved to see me. Thank God you're here early. Jess is having a minor meltdown about confronting your mom. I followed him into the kitchen where Jessica sat at the island counter, nursing a cup of tea and looking anxious. Hey, I said gently, setting down the portfolio containing the nursery designs. How are you feeling? She gave me a wan smile. Physically or emotionally? Because physically, I'm basically a swollen beach ball with heartburn. Emotionally, I'm a mess about this conversation with Mom. I pulled up a stool beside her. What's the worst that could happen? She considered this. She gets upset, guilts me about depriving her of grandmother time, makes passive-aggressive comments for the next 20 years. Okay, yes, I conceded. That's fairly likely. But will it change your mind about what's best for you and the baby? No, she said firmly, one hand protectively covering her belly. I need those first months just for us, Mark, me, and the baby. I need to figure out motherhood without Mom hovering and criticizing and taking over. I squeezed her arm. Then that's your answer. We're not asking for her approval, just informing her of your decision. Mark placed a glass of water in front of me. We've been practicing what to say. Direct but kind, firm but not confrontational. I couldn't help smiling at their earnest preparation. You know she's going to be upset no matter how you phrase it, right? Jessica sighed. I know, but I need to do this differently than I've done everything else with her. I need to not cave at the first sign of disapproval. The doorbell rang precisely at 1 o'clock. Linda Camden's punctuality was legendary and strategic. It gave her the moral high ground of promptness from which to judge others' time management. Mark went to answer, while Jessica and I exchanged a bracing look. We've got this, I assured her. My parents entered the living room with the practiced affability of experienced social performers. My mother carried a large gift bag overflowing, with tissue paper, while my father trailed behind with a potted plant. Jessica, darling, my mother exclaimed, immediately moving to embrace my sister while pointedly ignoring me. You're positively glowing. Jessica accepted the hug with good grace. Thanks, Mom. Hi, Dad. My father gave her a gentler hug, then turned to acknowledge me. Rachel, good to see you. How's business? Before I could answer, my mother interjected. We brought something for the nursery, she announced, thrusting the gift bag toward Jessica. Just a little something to get. Started. Jessica opened it to reveal a pink cashmere baby blanket, monogrammed with the letter C for Camden. It was exactly the kind of expensive, impractical baby item my mother favored, chosen for appearance rather than function. It's beautiful, Mom, Jessica said sincerely. Thank you both. I thought it could be kept at our house, my mother added casually, for when the baby stays over. And there it was, the assumption disguised as generosity, the boundary crossing presented as a gift. Jessica caught my eye, took a deep breath, and gestured toward the couch. Why don't we all sit down? Mark and I want to talk about our plans for after the baby arrives. My mother settled on the couch, arranging herself with the poised confidence of someone accustomed to directing conversations. Yes, we have some thoughts about that too. I've been researching the best way to set up the nursery at our house. I'm thinking of that yellow guest room. It gets such lovely morning light. Jessica sat opposite her, with Mark standing supportively behind her. I took a seat in the adjacent armchair, positioning myself as an ally but allowing Jessica to lead. Actually, Mom, Jessica began carefully, that's what we wanted to discuss. Mark and I have been talking a lot about what the first few months will look like. Of course you have, my mother nodded approvingly. It's important to be prepared. I've already told all my friends I'll be less available for bridge club. I expect to be at your house helping most days. And then you'll want weekends off once you're back at work. The baby can stay with us, and you two can have some couple time. The breathtaking presumption silenced everyone momentarily. Jessica looked at Mark, who gave her an encouraging nod. Mom, Dad, Jessica said, her voice steadier than I expected. We really appreciate your enthusiasm about the baby. But Mark and I have decided that for the first 3 months, we want to establish our own routines as a family. Just the 3 of us. My mother's expression didn't change, but her fingers tightened slightly on her purse. What exactly does that mean? Jessica took another breath. It means we won't be having overnight visits during that time. And while we'd love for you to visit, we'll need to schedule those visits in advance, and they'll need to be shorter at first. Maybe an hour or 2. The silence that followed was heavy with tension. My father looked uncomfortable but unsurprised. My mother's face had gone perfectly still, her social mask firmly in place. I see, she said finally. You don't want me involved. That's not it, Mom, Jessica insisted. We want you involved in ways that support us as new parents, not in ways that take over. There's a difference. My mother's gaze shifted to me. I suppose this was your idea? Keeping me at arm's length from my own grandchild? The familiar deflection, blaming me for any resistance to her control, was so predictable I almost laughed, but Jessica surprised me by interjecting before I could respond. "No, Mom. This was my decision, mine and Mark's. Rachel has been nothing but supportive of whatever choices we make." My mother's eyes widened slightly at this unified front. It was unprecedented in our family dynamic. "Well," she said stiffly, "I'm only trying to help. When I had you girls, my mother was there every day. I don't know how I would have managed otherwise." And there it was, the subtle guilt tactic, the implication that Jessica was somehow rejecting a treasured family tradition rather than establishing healthy boundaries. "Every family is different," Mark said gently, speaking up for the first time. "And every new parent needs to find their own way. We're not saying we don't want your help or involvement. We're just asking for some space to figure things out together first." My mother turned to my father, clearly expecting him to intervene on her behalf. But he simply shrugged, his expression resigned. "Seems reasonable to me, Linda," he said mildly. "They're the parents. It's their call." This unexpected lack of support seemed to genuinely throw my mother. She opened her mouth, closed it again, then finally said, "Well, if you're both determined to make things harder on yourselves, I suppose I can't stop you." Jessica reached for her hand. "Mom, please try to understand. This isn't about rejecting your help. It's about establishing ourselves as parents in our own right. Once we feel more confident, we'll be in a better position to include you in ways that work for everyone." My mother withdrew her hand, her expression closed. "And what about the nursery I've already started preparing? The furniture I've ordered?" "You ordered furniture?" Jessica looked genuinely surprised. "Mom, we never discussed that. I wanted it to be a surprise." My mother's voice had taken on the martyred tone I knew so well. "I suppose I'll have to cancel the delivery. Unless you'd like to reimburse me, of course." The manipulation was so transparent it was almost comical. Before Jessica could respond, I decided it was time to intervene. "Actually," I said, reaching for my portfolio, "that brings us to the designs Jessica asked me to create. We've been working on a comprehensive system for the nursery here, something that will evolve as the baby grows." I spread the detailed drawings across the coffee table, elevation views of built-in storage, a modular changing station that would later convert to a desk, floating shelves that adjusted in height. The designs were among my best work, tailored specifically to Jessica and Mark's space and preferences. "These are beautiful, Rachel," my father said, leaning forward with genuine interest. "Really clever how this part transforms." My mother stared at the drawings without speaking, her expression unreadable. I could almost see the conflict playing out behind her eyes, the desire to dismiss my work warring with the undeniable quality of the designs and the fact that Jessica had chosen them. "We're so excited about these," Jessica said, filling the awkward silence. "Rachel's incorporating wood tones that match our existing furniture, and everything is designed to grow with the baby. The production team is starting construction next week." "You've already committed to this?" my mother asked, her voice tight. Jessica nodded. "Yes, it's exactly what we wanted. Professional, functional, beautiful." The pointed emphasis on professional wasn't lost on any of us. Jessica was not just choosing my designs, she was acknowledging my expertise in a domain our mother had always dismissed. My mother pursed her lips. "Well, I suppose I should cancel my orders then." She reached for her purse. "If you'll excuse me, I need to make a call." She walked to the kitchen, phone already in hand, her back rigid with disapproval. My father sighed and gave us an apologetic look. "She'll come around," he said quietly. "Once the baby's here, she'll be too in love to stay upset." Jessica smiled weakly. "I hope so." When my mother returned, her composure was fully restored, the mask of pleasant control firmly back in place. All taken care of, she announced. Now, shall we discuss the baby shower guest list? I've already started compiling names. Jessica shot me a panicked look. Actually, I intervened smoothly, Jessica and I were thinking of a small, intimate gathering. Maybe just 20 people or so. Close friends and immediate family. My mother blinked. 20 people? But I've already mentioned it to the entire bridge club, and your father's cousins from Minnesota, and the church committee. Mom, Jessica said firmly, finding her voice again. We want something small, low-key, no big production. But it's the first grandchild, my mother protested. People can adjust their expectations, Jessica interrupted, with a conviction that surprised all of us. This is our baby, our celebration. We get to decide what that looks like. My mother's face flushed. For a moment, I thought she might make a scene, raise her voice, issue ultimatums, deploy the tears that had so often ended family discussions in her favor. Instead, she simply picked up her purse, her movements deliberate. Robert, she said to my father, I believe we should be going. My father looked startled. Already? But we just got here. I suddenly have a headache, she said pointedly. I need to lie down. The abrupt departure was another familiar tactic, leaving dramatically to underline her disapproval. We all recognized it for what it was, but the expected guilt and scrambling to appease her didn't materialize. Instead, Jessica remained seated, her expression resolute, despite the tears shimmering in her eyes. I'm sorry you're not feeling well, Mom, she said calmly. Let me know when you're up for continuing this conversation. We can talk more about the shower later. It was a masterclass in boundary setting, acknowledging the stated reason for leaving without giving in to the manipulation behind it. I felt a surge of pride for my sister, who had spent her life accommodating our mother's emotions at the expense of her own. After our parents left, Jessica collapsed onto the couch, emotionally exhausted. That was horrible, and yet, somehow, not as bad as I expected. Mark sat beside her, rubbing her back gently. You did amazing, really. He's right, I agreed, gathering up the design drawings. You were clear and firm without being unkind. That's all anyone can ask of themselves. Jessica looked up at me, her expression vulnerable. Do you think she'll forgive me? The question pierced me with its familiarity. How many times had we both asked that over the years? After every small act of independence, every divergence from her prescribed path, every boundary asserted, however timidly. Jess, I said gently, there's nothing to forgive. You haven't done anything wrong by deciding what's best for your family. She nodded, but I could see the lifetime of conditioning still working against her newfound resolve. I know that logically, but emotionally. Emotionally, it feels like betrayal, I finished for her. Like you're breaking some unwritten rule by putting your needs ahead of hers. Exactly. She looked relieved that I understood. That feeling gets easier over time, I promised her. The more you practice setting boundaries, the less guilty you feel about it. Mark stood up. I'll make some tea. You two talk. After he left for the kitchen, Jessica turned to me with an expression I hadn't seen since we were children sharing secrets under a blanket fort. How do you do it, Rachel? How do you stand up to her without falling apart inside? The question caught me off guard. For so long, Jessica had been the successful one, the one who had figured out the formula for a happy life. My rebellious path had seemed like the harder road, the one paved with disapproval and criticism. Practice, I said honestly. Years of disappointing her by being myself. At some point, the fear of her disapproval became less powerful than my need to live authentically. Jessica absorbed this, her hand absently stroking her rounded belly. I want that kind of courage for my daughter. I want her to see that it's okay to disappoint people sometimes if it means being true to yourself. She will, I assured her. because she'll have you as her mother, and me as her aunt. I smiled. The godmother who makes amazing storage solutions and doesn't cave to emotional manipulation. Jessica laughed, the tension finally breaking. The coolest aunt in Denver. We spent the rest of the afternoon discussing the nursery implementation, Jessica's birth plan, and the kind of intimate baby shower we both thought she deserved. It was the most honest, equal conversation we'd had as adults, unmarred by our mother's influence, untainted by the assigned roles that had shaped our relationship for so long. When I finally left that evening, I felt both drained and energized. Something fundamental had shifted between Jessica and me, between Jessica and our mother, between all of us and the familiar patterns that had defined our family for decades. As I drove back to my apartment, I realized that the changes weren't just happening in my family relationships. They were happening in me. The woman who had stood up for Jessica today, who had presented her designs with quiet confidence, who had navigated a difficult conversation without either crumbling or exploding. She was someone I was still getting to know. Someone who didn't need external validation to recognize her own worth. Someone who could hold space for her sister's growth while continuing her own. Someone who was building not just a business, but a life aligned with her values. The Denver skyline glittered against the darkening sky as I wound through the city streets, heading home. There would be more difficult conversations, more boundary tests, more growing pains as we all adjusted to new dynamics. But for the first time, I felt truly equipped to face them. Not alone, but alongside my sister, both of us finally writing our own stories rather than the ones we'd been assigned. The day of the Livingston launch arrived with picture-perfect Denver weather. Clear blue skies and summer warmth without the intensity of July heat. I stood in front of my closet, contemplating what to wear to the event that would officially introduce Modern Space to the national market. My hand lingered over the power blazer before moving to a simple navy dress with clean lines and minimal detailing, exactly the aesthetic that defined my designs. My phone rang as I was fastening a small silver pendant around my neck. Jessica. "Morning, just calling to wish you good luck today," she said, her voice warm. "Though I'm sure you don't need it." "Thanks, Jess. How are you feeling? Not too uncomfortable, I hope?" She laughed. "Only when I try to put on shoes or get up from the couch. Otherwise, I'm surprisingly good for 8 months pregnant in June." "And Mom? Has she been respecting the boundaries we discussed?" A pause. "Mostly. She's still bringing up the baby shower guest list every time we talk, but she stopped pushing about moving in after the birth. Progress, I guess." "Definite progress," I agreed, slipping on the simple leather heels I'd chosen for the day. "Any word on the smaller shower I'm planning?" "All good. Just 15 people like we discussed. Though..." Jessica hesitated. "What?" "Mom keeps asking if she can help with the planning. I told her you have it handled, but you know how she is." I smiled to myself. Of course my mother wouldn't relinquish control completely. "I'll call her. Suggest she handle the cake. That should keep her occupied." "You're a genius," Jessica said gratefully. "Now go crush this launch. Call me tonight with all the details." David was waiting when I arrived at the flagship Livingston store in Cherry Creek, Denver's upscale shopping district. He paced near the entrance, checking his watch. "There you are," he said, relief evident in his voice. "They're doing the final setup inside. It looks amazing, Rachel." We entered together, and I stopped just inside the door, momentarily stunned. The entire front section of the store had been transformed into a Modern Space showcase. My designs, the same ones I'd assembled in my tiny apartment, refined in shared workspaces, perfected in our workshop, now stood prominently displayed under professional lighting. The Modern Space logo, minimal and elegant, hung above it all. And there, larger than life, was my photograph from the catalog. Me in my element, creating in my workshop. "Wow," I breathed. David nodded beside me. Yeah, wow is right. The Livingston executive team greeted us warmly, leading us through the display while explaining the rollout timeline for other stores. Customers were already beginning to arrive, some clearly there specifically for the launch event that had been advertised in local media. Ms. Camden? A store associate approached. There's a gentleman asking about the adjustment mechanism on the shelf system. He'd like to speak with the designer if possible. And just like that, I was swept into the day. What followed was a blur of conversations, demonstrations, and impromptu interviews with several local publications that had sent reporters to cover the launch. I explained design elements, answered questions about materials and sustainability, demonstrated the adaptability features that made the products unique. I was in the middle of showing a young couple how the nursery system converted for different stages of childhood when I looked up and froze. Standing near the store entrance, looking distinctly out of place among the fashionable Cherry Creek crowd, were my parents. My father spotted me first, raising a hand in an awkward wave. My mother stood beside him, her expression unreadable, clutching her purse like a shield. I excused myself from the couple and made my way across the floor, pulse quickening with each step. What were they doing here? We hadn't spoken since the tense conversation at Jessica's house 2 weeks earlier. Mom, Dad, this is unexpected. My father smiled, genuine warmth in his eyes. We wanted to see it for ourselves. Your big day. My mother nodded stiffly. Jessica mentioned it was today. We were in the area for lunch, so the explanation was transparent. They didn't happen to be in Cherry Creek. They had come deliberately, though whether out of genuine interest or some complicated need to assess my success firsthand, I couldn't tell. Well, welcome, I said, gesturing to the display around us. This is modern space, my designs. My father immediately moved toward the nearest unit, examining the craftsmanship with genuine interest. The joinery on this is impressive, Rachel. No visible hardware. Magnetic fastening system, I explained, falling into the familiar pattern of technical explanation. Allows for reconfiguration without tools or visible connection points. My mother remained where she was, her gaze moving from the products to the oversized photo of me, then back again. I couldn't read her expression, something between surprise and something else. Assessment, perhaps. Would you like me to show you how it all works? I offered, extending an olive branch. She hesitated, then nodded once. I suppose since we're here. I led them through the display, explaining each piece, its function, the problem it was designed to solve. My father asked questions, engaged actively with the designs. My mother remained largely silent, though I caught her running a finger along one shelf edge, testing the finish. The materials are sustainable, I found myself explaining, though she hadn't asked. Bamboo, reclaimed wood, non-toxic finishes. She nodded again. It's all very nice. From my mother, this qualified as effusive praise. I felt something in my chest loosen slightly. As we completed the circuit of the display, David approached, professional smile in place. Mr. and Mrs. Camden, what a pleasure to meet you again. Rachel didn't mention you'd be attending. My mother extended her hand automatically. It was a last-minute decision. We were curious to see what all the fuss was about. David's smile didn't falter. And what do you think? Impressive, isn't it? My mother glanced around at the growing crowd of customers examining the products, at the reporters still hovering, at the Livingston executives watching the successful launch unfold. It appears Rachel has found her audience, she said finally. Not quite approval, but acknowledging reality. It was something. My father shook David's hand firmly. It's extraordinary what she's built. We're very proud. The simple statement, so casually delivered, caught me off guard. Proud. Had he ever used that word about me before? I couldn't recall. My mother's lips tightened slightly, but she didn't contradict him. Instead, she opened her purse and withdrew a small, flat package wrapped in tissue paper. "This was your grandmother's," she said, holding it out to me. I thought perhaps today would be an appropriate time to pass it on. Bewildered, I accepted the package and carefully unwrapped it. Inside was a delicate silver compact mirror, engraved with my grandmother's initials. I'd admired it as a child, fascinated by its intricate design and the secret compartment inside that had once held powder. "Mom, I don't know what to say." The gift was completely unexpected, laden with meaning I couldn't quite decipher. "She was also stubborn about following her own path," my mother said, her voice uncharacteristically soft, much to my frustration as a teenager. The admission that my grandmother had been similarly independent-minded, that my mother had once been the daughter rather than the controlling mother, opened a tiny window into a perspective I'd never considered. "Thank you," I said simply, closing my fingers around the compact. "It means a lot to me." She nodded once, then glanced at her watch. "We should be going. You're clearly busy with your customers." "My customers," I repeated softly, the phrase settling over me like a mantle I was finally ready to wear. My father gave me a quick hug. "We'll see you Sunday at Jessica's, won't we? For the small shower you're organizing." I nodded, surprised he knew about it. "Yes, just a small gathering. Close friends and family." "Your mother's handling the cake," he added with a small smile. "She's already called 3 bakeries to compare options. Some things would never change, but perhaps they could evolve, shifting into new formations that allowed each of us more room to be ourselves." After they left, David approached again. "Everything okay?" I looked down at the silver compact in my palm, then up at the photograph of myself working in my studio, and finally out at the crowd of people engaging with my designs, making them their own, seeing their value, willing to invest in their quality. "Yes," I said with a certainty that surprised even me. "Everything is exactly as it should be." The small shower for Jessica was everything the baby shower should have been: intimate, joyful, centered on her needs rather than social performance. My mother brought an elaborately decorated cake that was admittedly delicious, but otherwise allowed me to lead the festivities without interference. It was a delicate new dance we were learning, all of us adjusting our steps to accommodate changing rhythms. 2 weeks later, my niece Olivia was born. 7 pounds, 4 ounces of perfect newness that shifted our family's center of gravity. Once again, I was in the waiting room with my parents when Mark emerged, exhausted and elated to share the news. "Everyone's healthy," he assured us. "Jessica was amazing." My mother immediately gathered her purse. "Can we see them?" Mark nodded. "Jessica's asking for her mom and her sister." The specific inclusion, not just family, but her sister, felt like recognition of the new relationship Jessica and I were building. My mother didn't comment on the phrasing, simply led the way toward the maternity wing with the confidence of someone who belonged wherever she decided to go. Jessica looked tired but radiant, cradling the tiny bundle against her chest. She looked up as we entered, her smile widening at the sight of us. "Mom, Rachel, meet your granddaughter and niece." My mother approached reverently, her usual composure softened by genuine emotion. "Oh, Jessica, she's perfect." I stood slightly back, giving them this moment together, mother and daughter sharing the profound transition into a new generation of motherhood. Despite all the complications, all the patterns we were working to reshape, this connection between them was real and precious. Then Jessica looked up at me, her expression warm. "Rachel, come meet your goddaughter." I moved forward as my mother stepped aside, making room for me beside the bed. Jessica carefully transferred the swaddled newborn into my arms. Olivia's eyes were closed, her perfect lips slightly parted, her entire being radiating the deep peace of the newly arrived. "Hi, Olivia," I whispered. "I'm your Aunt Rachel. I've been waiting to meet you." As I held her, I felt a profound sense of connection, not just to this tiny new person, but to Jessica, to the family we were reconfiguring together, even to my mother who stood watching us with complex emotions playing across her face. "The nursery is ready whenever you are," I told Jessica softly. "Everything installed just as we designed it." She smiled. "Perfect timing." My mother approached again, her hand gently touching the baby's blanket. "She needs a family photo." The 3 Camden women. The inclusion startled me. 3 Camden women, acknowledging me as part of this lineage, this continuity. Jessica nodded at the nurse, who took my mother's phone and positioned herself to capture the moment. "Closer together," my mother directed, her arm slipping around my shoulders as we both leaned in near Jessica and Olivia. The gesture was tentative but deliberate, crossing a physical boundary that had existed between us for years. The camera flashed, capturing the 4 of us in a moment of imperfect harmony. The past, present, and future of our family held in a single frame. Not erased or rewritten, but evolving into something new, something with more room for all of us to exist as our authentic selves. As I left the hospital that evening, I checked my phone to find an email from Eleanor Harding at Design Innovation magazine. The subject line read, "Feature confirmed, September issue." I smiled, tucking the phone back into my bag. The external validation was gratifying, but it no longer defined my sense of worth. That had finally taken root somewhere deeper, nourished by professional success. Yes, but also by the harder, more essential work of reclaiming my place in my family on my own terms. The journey wasn't over. These new patterns were still fragile, these boundaries still being tested and refined. But standing in the warm summer evening outside the hospital where my niece had just been born, I felt something I'd been seeking for years without fully recognizing it. The quiet certainty that I belonged exactly where I was, doing exactly what I was meant to do, not despite my differences, but because of them. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.